as we know, you're going to be more effective if when you launch a public education campaign, if there's not only just the posters and other elements of it in terms of print, but if it's amplified and built on in other ways as well. So this workshop is really another way that supplements and supports that campaign. And so let's, I think most of you know us. I think most of you have been with us for the last couple of days. I think there may be a few new people, but just to briefly introduce ourselves again, Pat McGann, Director of Strategy and Planning for Men Can Stop Rape. I've been with the organization for more than 20 years, so I just started with it really just shortly after it was founded in 1997, and worn a lot of different hats. Started out as the volunteer coordinator, but and then went into communications. I have a degree in language literacy and rhetoric, but love strategy and planning, so that's kind of where I ended up. But I've done a lot of different things, just about everything in terms of the organization, because it's, you know, it was fairly small once upon a time. It's fairly large. Well, I wouldn't say it's large at all now, but there are 12 staff, which is a lot more than we started out with. And so, Jeremy, why don't you say a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for those of you who are back and returning, and for those who are new, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Jeremy Hardy. I'm a training and technical assistance manager for Men Can Stop Rape, and I joined the organization in 2017. Fortunately, I was fortunate enough to have Pat actually train me while I was a college student learning how to do this work. And so I've really come in that role, and I'm doing more of the programmatic side and delivering the content. And so I'm excited, you know, to build on what we've already done, and for those who are just joining us for the first time today, to introduce to you some of how we approach bystander intervention trainings, bringing the gender lens and masculinity lens that we do, and uplifting the Where Do You Stand campaign.
Great, thanks, Jeremy. And I think I'll run really quickly through Men Can Stop Rape. I think we've got that coming up. Oh no, we go straight to SEO and dominant stories. But let me say a little bit about Men Can Stop Rape, just for those new people. We work basically in 3 areas: youth development, where our Men of Strength Club and our Wives Clubs of Women Inspiring Strength and Empowerment are located. We've been doing those, well, the Men of Strength Club since 2000, and it is not only in DC where we're located, but it's in 28 other states. And we do public education campaigns, as you're aware of. We've done them for the Department of Defense. We've done them for a number of state coalitions. We've done them for DC high schools. Really, we've done campaigns really around the country and around the world. So it's something we've been doing since 2001. And then we do training and technical assistance. We've been a technical assistance provider for different federal agencies, Department of Justice, Office on Violence Against Women, Department of Health and Human Services, Office on Women's Health, for example. So that's something we've have quite a lot of experience with, both, you know, on the training side, but also on the technical assistance side, just in terms of giving feedback, direction, input, all those sorts of things. So that's a little bit about Men Can Stop Rape. It's a little bit different than the other introduction we did. So, want to go on? Right. Why don't you go ahead, Jim?
Sure. Do you want me to take it from here, Pat?
Yep. Well, I thought the toy exercise is up, right?
It is. This slide just comes first.
This is yours. This is yours.
Yeah. So we're going to start off with a quick exercise that we love to do. I mean, Pat and I were just talking about it, you know, yesterday, and you know, every time we get to revisit it, it's a lot of fun for us. And so I just want to frame for us kind of where we're going in this first section and kind of where we'll be going with the rest of this webinar. So we're really hoping to, in the effort to talk about bystander intervention and its connections with healthy masculinity and men preventing violence, want to sprinkle in some elements of social and emotional learning that we feel are really important to the conversation and important to lift up when we have it. And so we're also going to get into looking at what dominant stories of masculinity are as it relates to those elements of the emotional lives of boys and men. That will become, clear and important later when we talk more explicitly about bystander intervention. And so for those of you who are joining for the first time, we have a framework, that we use, dominant and counter stories, and we're going to get a little more into what those are. So just bear with us. So what we'd like to do is get to know you all a little bit more and share with you all a little bit about ourselves as well. Can I invite folks to, in the chat box with everybody, report out, share out, what was your favorite toy or game to play as a child? What was the thing that you liked to do? And if you have multiple favorites or you can't pick, or, just pick one, and anything is fine. We just want to hear from you, We'd love to connect and share about this piece. So I'll give you all a minute to, yeah. Don't overthink it.
And you could start. Oh, people that aren't overthinking, they're coming up with stuff. Yeah.
So we got 3 Barbies already. Clue, skip it. Ooh, what's skip it?
I don't know.
See, this is the best part about this thing, Pat. I mean, there's so much wisdom in games that required imagination, that was not technology dependent. That for a millennial like me to grow up, with technology, we missed out on the imagination stage in some ways. That's not across the board. It's not a blanket statement, but it's still true. Anything but Barbies, okay.
It's always interesting.
Outside,
yeah.
Oh, go ahead,
do this
Pat.
a lot, but I always learn some new games or new ways of playing.
You have anything
like
outside?
Playing in the creek. I don't think I've heard Playing in the Creek before. Have you heard Playing in the Creek?
Well, I don't know if that's a game or if that was just something that Takoa did for fun, as a game or as as a win.
I was just assuming it was something Takoa did just for fun.
And for these ones that we're not familiar with, Lincoln Logs, just Playing in the Creek, Skip It. If you all want to unmute yourselves and share a little bit more about the game or the fun that you were having, please do. Now's the chance to do that.
I loved Lincoln Logs.
Oh, you know what that is, Pat. Okay.
Oh yes.
Let's see. I mostly remember having Barbies as toys, but spend most of my time outside on a farm. That was until Nintendo. Yeah. Oh, that was easy. I'm the one who doesn't.
Well, you've seen a log.
Stuff.
You've seen a log cabin. It's just you'd build little pieces where you build only they're little logs sort of shaped.
Oh, I know what they are. Oh, thank you. Yes. Yeah. Okay. I didn't know they were called Lincoln Logs.
Yep.
Awesome. So we got several responses. Any others? Just want to add in. Just a little, Christina. Yeah, just a little. Pat, what was your favorite game or toy?
My favorite toy was, and I'll just say, I don't know any of some people your age will talk a lot about e-gaming and games that way. I don't know any of those, but one of my favorite toys was a big plastic tank that was a remote tank, and it wasn't remote in the true sense of the word because it had a wire that ran from the tank to the remote, so I had to run along with the tank as it was kind of going. But I just thought it was the coolest thing at the time. But And not toys so much, but I loved comic books. I mean, that was more reading material. But yours?
Nice. I feel like I always do something different for this because I was fortunate in my childhood to have so much fun. Let's see, which one are we gonna do today? I want to go video games since that's the role that I'm already putting myself into. Super Smash Bros. Melee on the Nintendo GameCube. To this day is it really is a historic game. And there's just something about it, with the setup for the gameplay and like how everybody would just corral around it. My friend and I played, hours and hours of Smash Bros. And we had this funny relationship. Now that I'm thinking back on it, we played ping pong together and we played Smash Bros. And stuff. And he just beat me at everything. He was just better at it. He owned the system. I didn't have video games in my household. And I did not mind losing because I loved the challenge of getting a little bit better each time, to the point that I did eventually become much better than him. And so, we stopped playing the game, which
I think this is something I know about you.
Yeah, I'm extremely competitive.
Yes, I know that.
Yeah, the Switch. The game lives
trampoline. On. Oh yeah.
And then I see Michelle. Thank you for the explanation about Skip It. I do remember that in the elementary school schoolyard, and seeing all those and the little hop and dance and everything. A lot of fun.
I don't remember that. I still don't remember that. My chair is kind of sliding all over. If I'm there's in a lot of motion, that would be why. I don't know why it's being so active today.
What's happening?
My chair is kind of sliding all over, so if I slide around, that's what's going on. I don't know why.
I think we got one more person typing in. Just want to make space for that before we move on. But while that person is typing in, I do also just want to say we're planning to go to 3 o'clock, and so hopefully we'll be able to end right on time today. Let's see. My family can't play most board games or cards because we're too competitive. Ooh, Monopoly board was upended last time we played. Wow.
Oh.
I relate. I mean, I don't know if we ever upended. I'll just say, when I was a kid, I was bad. I cheated sometimes. I really wanted to win those board games. And I think I lost my sister's trust because she was just like, it's no fun to play with you anymore. I don't want to come to your birthday party. And I think that was centered around board games. I can absolutely relate to that. Wonderful. So thank you, everyone. So, we got a lot of different, games and toys that have come up. And I appreciate you all contributing and sharing some of your stories and explaining to some folks who don't know things that we should know about. So that was just a, icebreaker exercise, and now we're going to move into the second part of the exercise. So normally we ask, who knows what a word cloud or a wordle is? And I'll just tell you, a word cloud or wordle, some of you may know, some of you may not, basically is a way of presenting a data set that looks at a list of words or text usually. And so the words that appeared most frequently in that text, whether it be a book, commercials, advertisements, magazines, whatever, the words that appeared most will, on this word cloud, appear largest, and words that appear less frequently will proportionally appear smaller. And so we've got a word cloud here in front of you all that we'd like to talk about. And so I'm going to lean into some of the duh questions here. The answer is obvious, but we're going somewhere with it. So what are the things that stand out to you about this word cloud here? What themes are you starting to see, amidst the other, larger words that are obviously in front of you? Battle, power, ultimate, heroes, transform, armor. Can you all type in the chat box? What are some things that you're noticing about this word cloud? What's the story that's being told here? Sounds like war. Thank you, Christina. Others? They are related. Thank you, Donald. Can I ask you to elaborate on that? How are they related? Thank you, Stacy. It's action rather than thought or emotion-oriented. Nikki, it's domination. Thank you, Donald. Usually one involves another. Yeah, that's a great point. They're very interconnected, interdependent. Again, we see war. Okay, awesome. Great. Okay, so thank you all for that. So what I'm going to do is show us another word cloud. And again, I'm going to ask you all to lean into the obvious. You'll see the words that appear largest. And again, what's the story that's being told by this next word cloud here? So what do we see here with this next word cloud? What are the themes? What's the story that's being told here? What stands out the most? The last one, we got war and domination, action, not emotion. This one we've got, thank you, Carly, we've got happiness. Parenting a female child. Fun. Thank you, Stacy. Thank you, Donald. It's more related to emotion and relationships and physical characteristics / looks. Girly girl, valley girl. Thank you, Michelle. Yeah, any others? Other themes or things that stand out to folks? Are there any words in particular that you're like, what's that doing there? Positivity. So, perfect. Stand out to me. Perfect. Yeah. So hang on to that, Stacy. Thank you for sharing that. So I'm curious. I'm going to go to the next slide. I think it has both. So where do you all think these word clouds might have come from? If a word cloud is generated from a body of text or places where you can find words, where do these word clouds come from? And this is guesses are helpful here. A girl's story versus a boy's story, maybe. Thank you, Stacy. Stereotypical masculine and female. Experiences. So, a researcher had done in 2011 a study looking at boys and girls toy commercials. And so they drew from, Hot Wheels and Beyblades and G.I. Joe and Ninja Turtles, the words that stand out most in the advertisements, the commercials that are targeted towards boys' toys sales. And same thing for the girls' toys. Bratz, Barbie dolls, My Little Pony, I almost said Hello Pony. My Little Pony, Hello Kitty, the whole, in-house kitchen set, everything. So if we now know that these two different word clouds are from boys' toys and girls' toys, from the commercial selling those toys, how does that, influence the way that we see these word clouds now? What are the messages that are being, shared or sent to boys and girls about their play, about what it means to be masculine, what it means to be feminine? And again, we can lean into some obvious answers here. What are the first things that come to mind for you all? Rough versus soft. While folks are typing, I'd be curious, Pat, if there are any words that you saw this time that you haven't seen before, or if anything struck you differently than in the past.
I don't know. I mean, I'm the girl one, the girl toys one seems so light. I'm just thinking it's summer, glam. And the other just feels heavier.
Mm-hmm. Christina also shared battle v love equals fight v embrace. I'm not sure if I totally understand, Christina. So, like, on one side you've got okay, right. Battle on one side versus love on the other. The same thing as like fighting versus embracing. Okay, I gotcha. And then Stacey shared, girls should practice love and makes others central. Boys should practice power over instead of power with. So yeah, absolutely. And you know, I would really encourage, you know, you can find these images on Google and just download them for yourself. One of the reasons that I really like this exercise is because we can really go down the rabbit hole in looking at what the messages are here. And I'm just going to, you know, go back really quick just to zoom in on the slides a little bit more. You know, we're seeing this real theme on the boys' word cloud, the boys' toys, of battle, of roughness, of power over, and a lot of action, you know, as you all had pointed out. And then on the girls' toys, you know, a lot of relationship-centered, more emotional, maybe even more girly girl or something, you know, to that effect. It's positive. You know, there's a strong sense of, like, kind of happy and light emotions, and I like that you use that word as well, Pat. And, you know, one thing I always like to point out, on the boys' toys, you know, I don't see, like, is friendship up here? Is friendship on here? And usually point to, yeah, it's right here on the bottom, but beneath special forces, just little, you know, version of friends.
I can't even read it. These old ads, like, is that what that says?
I can zoom in here. Right here, friends.
Yeah, okay. Now I can read it.
And then on the girls' toys, you know, you've got friendship really big, and then friends again over on the right side. And so, you know, it's just interesting to see when we look at the overlap that exists between them. Excuse me. There's not a lot. And if there is some, then it, you know, only overlaps in these minor ways. And so, you know, it creates a real divide. We can look at, you know, just the very binary nature of splitting gender into a masculine and feminine presentation, and that the masculine is, you know, preparing to be the Joseph Campbell story, the hero that leaves home and comes back for the, you know, this feminine side, this you know, girls' toys side. The role there is to be the object to come back for, to fight for. In the Joseph Campbell, there's only one story, the hero's narrative story. And so what I'm interested in is, you know, like we could really go down the rabbit hole with it, but what I'm interested in is what emotion do you see coming through each of these word clouds? What's the emotion that exists there? So we heard from folks that there's like happiness and lightness, positivity on the girls' side. Let's go a little bit further with that. You know, how does it make you feel to see that these are the messages that girls' toys are advocating for? How does the boys' toys word cloud make you feel? What is your response to seeing it?
And this, Jeremy, this is based on a study done in, when was it, 2012, or is that right?
2011, and I
2011.
feel bad that I'm blanking on the author's name. Yeah.
But if you do go online and just type in boys' toys, girls' toys, word clouds, these will come up.
Boys' toys equals confrontation. Girls' toys equals caring, compassion. Yeah, the relational stance that comes out We've got confrontation on the one side, caring, compassion on the other. Thank you, Christina. It makes me angry, like I want to battle. The girl side feels like home. Yeah, and I like that you bring that up, Christina, because it also points to, like, we know that these are, boys and girls toys, that the companies that are trying to benefit from, a more divided idea, a more binary view of gender, are going to present it as such. And yet we know, in our counter-story view of gender, that these things are not mutually exclusive, that they can exist in whole people all together. And, there's no way that girls are siloed from, are completely siloed from experiencing the sense of battle or a sense of power. And boys are not completely siloed from feeling love or magic and being in touch with, those different emotions as well. Thank you, Stacey. The boys' word cloud makes me feel apprehensive, also sad that this is the message that they are getting. The girls' word cloud makes me feel warm and fuzzy-ish. So, yeah. So I appreciate all that, and it makes me come back to, kind of just a relational orientation that's being shaped by these messages. And one of the, things that you all had shared was that the boys' word cloud is more action-oriented. Whoop, what's happening?
Oh, sorry, that was,
Is that you, Pat?
Sorry, that was me.
Okay, let's see.
So sorry.
How do I go back to mine? Oh, no. Okay,
how do I go back to mine? Sorry.
Sarah, should we just defer to you? And I'm not sure the role is here. Or it feels like we're not helping.
I was trying to help so I could read it a little better, but that was me. Sorry. I thought I'd...
That's okay, Pat.
Yes.
Don't worry, we'll get this sorted out. I'm curious to know if people can still see the presentation or not, because right now the chat box is the only thing I can see.
That's all I can see as well. I was just trying to adjust my chat box, but it changed yours as well.
Okay, most people can see just the chat. Thank you all for
there you go.
that. So this is the whiteboard. I don't want the whiteboard. I want my screen.
Yes.
Let's see. Oh, here we go. Oh, that's gone. It disappeared.
It's just gone. There you go.
I think Sarah is getting us right.
Yes. Do you see share my screen now? Yeah. There you go.
Okay, there we go.
All right. My apologies.
There we go. Are we good?
Yeah.
Yes, we are. Thank you, Sarah.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
If folks cannot see my screen, and I've got the two slides up, the two word clouds up. If you can't see my screen, please let us know. Where was I? So there's the relational stance that is being shaped by the messaging of these different word clouds that I want to lift up. And somebody had mentioned action, right? So there's a dominant story of masculinity that boys are encouraged to perform a kind of active participation in their lives, that they are, the world is their oyster sort of thing. And there's an aspect of that dominant story that's really valuable in wanting to encourage, young people to be authorized to feel that they can contribute to and make change. And at the same time, I think if it spills, to the other end of the continuum of seeing the whole world as, through the lens of competition and domination and the confrontational nature that you all are pointing to in the word cloud for the boys' toys, is the kind of dominant story of masculinity that we're also wanting to subvert here. And, similarly with, the way that I think we can, point to how the girls' word cloud, the story that it depicts creates in the boys' minds, in a dominant story lens, that the girl is somebody to save, right? This damsel in distress narrative that we can get into a little bit later, right? And so these are some different relational stances, some different images and ideas that are being shaped by these different word clouds and boys and girls toys commercials. And I'm really wanting to highlight, what you all have said about the way that these two lists create confrontation and then caring as some of the major emotions. We're going to use that as we move into more of our conversations about bystander intervention. And as you can hear me just talking and rambling, there's so much to unpack from these two word clouds that could really, serve as its own conversation. But what we like to do is have our favorite toy exercise begin some of these sessions, not only because we get to get in touch with our own past, but also connect with others through them. And then we can also examine how unhealthy and healthy masculinity are taught from an early age, that these messages don't permanently define boys and men's lives. And then, of course, the differentiation or the different gender socialization among men and between men and women. And so as we move into our next pieces here, I just want to, hold on to, for the group, the elements of the emotions that are being captured in those two word clouds. So, Pat, I think this is, is this still me?
You still continue. Yep.
So, I had mentioned, those of you who have been with us for the past 2 days, you've heard us talk about dominant stories endlessly. For those who are new, dominant stories are a way of looking at masculinity, violence prevention, really anything. It's a framework through which we view the work. And so we define a dominant story of masculinity as, dominant story as it relates to manhood is a narrative representing the popular values and messages associated with a shared understanding of what it means to be a man. And these values and messages can be either healthy or unhealthy. Dominant stories often invisibly shape perceived reality. So we've adapted this from Hilda Nelson's Damaged Identities and Narrative Repair. And this framework, there are dominant stories. We call them dominant because of their presence, because of their impact, and because of the way that they show up as sometimes social norms or sometimes as cultural values. And yet, we want to point to how there are ways that some of these dominant stories can be healthy or can be beneficial, and ways that they can be, really problematic, really harmful. And of course, it's our job as, prevention educators, as folks who are disrupting rape culture, as intervening on harm and responding to those in need. We get to step in that space between what is healthy and what is unhealthy about these dominant stories and help people parse that out. Let's see. And so, one of the ways that we talk about dominant stories of masculinity, we can point to all that, there's so many examples of it. We just talked about it in the word cloud. But another place that we point to is this advertisement here with Kevin Durant. So for those of you who do not know Kevin Durant, he's a basketball player in the NBA. And at the time of this poster, he had just arrived at the OKC Thunder for that team. And there was this narrative that Kevin was kind of a nice guy, that he wasn't, all that competitive, that he wasn't such a great get for the team. And so Nike had put out an ad campaign saying just the opposite and highlighting his competitive nature and his numbers as an athlete, his attitude, leading the league in scoring in 3 years straight is not nice. Making defenders famous in all the wrong ways is not nice. Playing on all these narratives of athletics, of sport, and framing it as not nice, really just sort of captures, one, the sort of dominant stories of masculinity that we're talking about as part of the dominant story of masculinity, but also not nice. Back to the confrontational, competitive, war-like story from the boys' toys word cloud. It's almost saying that niceness is not valuable, that you should not be nice, and that we encourage and expect of our athletes, particularly our black athletes, a not nice presentation. So this here is just in front of you to, you know, help get you more familiar with, you know, some ways that we talk about dominant stories of masculinity in, you know, leading up to our conversation for how that plays into bystander intervention. And I just want to add here, you know, these sorts of show no emotion, feel no pain, or if you do show an emotion, it looks like anger. Or if you do show an emotion, it looks like the kind of confrontational emotion, domination that we see in the boys' toys word cloud. These are the elements of social and emotional learning that are wrapped up in the dominant story, that are siloing boys into a very limited expression of the human condition. So we want to expose a little bit about how that's not entirely true. So Pat, I'm going to pass it over to you to take us into counter stories.
Thank you, Jeremy. And just to point out real quickly, I know Jeremy was connecting the toy exercise with dominant and counter stories. I want to point out that you can use it as an introduction to dominant and counter stories as well. Certainly the battle on one side, the love on the other, those are very much dominant stories in terms of gender. And so it's a nice kind of introduction into the idea of dominant and counter stories. You've seen us do Real Man and Strongest Man, at least those of you who were with us the first day. And both those exercises are obviously introductions to dominant stories and counter stories of masculinity in particular. So there's lots of different ways to get at and introduce those dominant and counter stories. And so as Jeremy's pointing out, I like to think of, in terms of the toy exercise and the binary, the polar opposites that are kind of present in that exercise. I like to point out that I think men and boys, all the men and boys I know, and all the ones when we ask this question certainly would say that they, you know, want love to be part of their lives. Nobody would say that they don't, I think. So, you know, you have this kind of dominant story that really distances them from that side, and so it creates a kind of conflict. And so, you know, the counter story helps get them kind of closer to that kind of love side. It loosens up that binary, and it moves us also closer to healthy masculinity. I think that's kind of our foundation for it. So. And certainly empathy plays a role in that. Why don't we move on to the next slide? So back to KD, and can you just go to the next one? I think it'll get closer. And Jeremy, I'm going to ask you to read what it says out loud because I don't think I'll be able to do that. But so KD, I mean, I particularly like KD. I think he's he's a basketball player. He played for Oklahoma for a while, then went to Golden State, but he's from DC, and he's just a good guy, I think. So. And he decided after he did the Nike commercial, which was earlier in his career, he decided, well, how do I want to present myself? And so he really decided to do something that was kind of more in line in terms of the way he thought of himself. And so this is very much kind of in many ways, the polar opposite of what you see in the Nike commercial, and kind of similar to the polar opposites in the toy exercise. And so I know, Jeremy, you enlarged it so they could read some of it, but can we enlarge it again a little bit just so that I can read it out loud again, or just kind of share so I can speak
How's
to
that,
it?
Pat?
That's good right there. Don't mistake kindness for weakness. It's the strong who lend a hand, the tough who make a stand. Humble in victory, gracious in defeat. Building others up, tearing walls down. You get the idea that even though, you know, this is a very competitive guy, he's a stellar athlete, it's still kind of structuring it so that others matter. And he does that when the year he won the MVP award, he got, in his acceptance speech, he talked about everyone else except himself and how they helped lift him up. His mother, his teammates, his coach, everybody else, and certainly he does that for everybody else as well. So I think he's just an example of the counter story. And we like to say that the counter story is present in every man and boy's life. It may not be obvious. You may have to look for it and help highlight it, but it's always present. You know, it's never not there. So it's significant to recognize that you're not starting from ground zero. That there is something there to build on. And I think for us, that's the positive part of the work. You know, so that's
Pat,
some of the ideas behind it. Yeah, sure.
Well, I'm just remembering our conversations, you know, yesterday about athletics and wanting to engage athletics, and you know, also looking for and seeing and identifying the counter story. And I don't know if any of you have heard the phrase, you know, you're the real MVP. It's okay if you haven't, but that became very popular in pop culture after Kevin Durant's acceptance speech, where he made tribute to his mother and was just like, you know, everything I have is because of you. This is an award that may be for me, but it's really for you. And so, you know, through tears in his eyes, you know, said to her, you're the real MVP. And I also just want to lift up, like, you know, this is part of the counter story of why athletics is a resource for doing this work. To be able to go up on that kind of a stage and make that sort of a presentation had an impact. It changed social norms. People started saying, you're the real MVP, as a gesture of kindness, as a gesture of, like, I appreciate that. It's another way to say thank you. And sure, it may have been, you know, contemporary and trendy and has since faded away to some degree, but still it happened and it had an impact. Do you want to go to the next slide, Pat?
Yeah, oh yeah, yes, sorry, I assumed you were just going on. Yeah, thanks. So those of you, again, saw our description of the counter story yesterday. Those of you who are new, I mean, this is how we describe it. And again, as Jeremy was pointing out, it was developed from a book by Hildy Nelson called Damaged Identities Never Repair, where the dominant story, counter story, really frame what she's writing about there. Although she does not apply the dominant story and counter story to masculinity, so we adapted her presentation of those ideas to our work. And so the way we describe counter stories, narrative that resists the values and expectations of masculinity, unhealthy dominant stories, and therefore represents the possibility of a moral shift. And again, just to point out that you really, the moment at which you need counter stories is when those dominant stories are not serving us or other people when they're harmful in some sort of way or unhealthy. You need something to counter that. And so that's the purpose of those counter stories. If you could move on, Jeremy. Thanks. So again, we also presented this the first day, a working description of healthy masculinity. And really, it's just in terms of bystander intervention, if you look at it, you'll notice that it's really about awareness to action. So, and that really, it ends with what, you know, could be and conceived as bystander intervention. So, but you also notice that social and emotional intelligence plays a role in it. And in terms of what Jeremy was talking about earlier, in terms related to bystander intervention and social and emotional intelligence, we argue that social and emotional intelligence plays a role in bystander intervention, that your social and emotional intelligence is going to help you distinguish between those interventions that are going to be more effective in certain situations than other interventions are. So it's something that is really important to kind of, at least not just in terms of bystander intervention, but in all ways, we believe, to build men and boys' social and emotional intelligence. And as Jeremy is suggesting, there are various ways in which dominant stories of masculinity really diminish our emotional and social intelligence and even our capacity for that. Even though, clearly we have as much capacity, I would argue, as women and girls, but it's really this social construction of masculinity that really hampers us, and there's a reason for that, because it also entitles us as well. If there's an association of weakness with people who are emotional, and we say, well, we don't show emotion, we're not emotional, then that moves us up one level and that group of people down. And it is typically women and girls who are defined as emotional. And yet, we lose part of our humanity because, we are emotional beings. I mean, that's part of what makes us human. So all of that kind of comes into play in terms of bystander intervention, but also in many other ways as well. And Jeremy, you want to go on to the next slide? And this one I just put in here because we did an OVW roundtable, organized it, and we brought together more than 60 experts from around the country. And it was really interesting, a day and a half of all of us talking about where we are in terms of doing mobilizing and engaging men work and where we want to go. And one of the topics was developing a standard for healthy masculinity. And so you'll see here some of the points that they came up with, and I can stop there as well. We obviously participated, but it brought together people like Jackson Katz, Don McPherson. So you may know of them, but not just them. There were people from OVW. There were people from all sorts of community organizations and national organizations. It was a really interesting day and a half, but it talks about masculinity not being static. It means different things across community and through history, and we couldn't do the work around masculinity if that wasn't the case. Masculinity is fluid, and that's part of why we believe it can be changed for the better in terms of healthy masculinity. And multiple kinds of masculinity embodied by one person. So I know in terms of Jeremy and I, it's not just one kind of masculinity, one type of masculinity each of us carries, but multiple. And they may be different from each other in significant ways or interesting ways as well. And there's a difference between men being loving and caring and healthy as part of their roles as fathers and caregivers, but not internalizing those beliefs outside of their role as caregivers. So it's, how do we get young men and men to really kind of embrace their role as caregiver, but then extend it beyond, their immediate kind of role as caregiver. So, which is, that extension is really important in terms of the Men's Strength Club and the work that we do. So you can see there are a number of really interesting points. I just want to make the point with this slide that it's not just men can stop right thinking about all these issues, but there really is a movement built around healthy masculinity now that started really in 2012 with the Healthy Masculinity Action Project that we did, and that involved many different organizations and agencies as well. So there's some serious thought going into all of it. Jeremy, you want to? I think you're up next.
Yeah. Thanks, Pat. And so we just want to, introduce one of the ways that we think about the counter story of social and emotional learning by drawing from the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. They define SEL, I'm going to call it that for short. It's a process through which children and adults acquire and effectively apply the knowledge, attitudes, skills necessary to understand and manage emotions, set and achieve positive goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain positive relationships, and make responsible decisions. And one of the things that I like about this is it really mirrors our working description of healthy masculinity, it is an active process that is ongoing. And it requires one of introspection, and it's a relational lifestyle as well that adults and children both, everybody can acquire and work on and develop even further. Let's see, where's my next slide? So, the main core components of SEL that the collaborative defines are self-awareness, social awareness, self-management, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. And so these have different orientations, right? The self-awareness is thinking about yourself and what am I in touch with? How do I feel in this moment? What is going on for me? The social awareness of how you interact with a group or what the group is holding on to. Self-management, I've heard the folks who work at the Institute for Social and Emotional Learning, different than the collaborative, say management may not be quite the right word, and yet it speaks to the idea that there's something to be said about being able to work through the layers of emotions that people feel and be able to sort of pick and choose, which ones speak louder in our minds, which ones, are just telling us something, and which ones are, a driving force for something, as those play into our relationship skills, our responsible decision making. And so I just want to point us back to this little SEL tip on the top here, replacing harmful, risky, violent, masculine attitudes and behaviors with emotionally intelligent attitudes and behaviors that respect the self and others. That's one part of our working description of healthy masculinity. So what do we replace those harmful behaviors with? We replace them with these. These are the ones that we want to encourage. So, right, in terms of developing people, it's not just saying, don't do this. It's also saying, let's do this. And, in our view, as we talk about social and emotional learning and its connection to empathy, it's important that we as folks who are doing this work empathize with men and boys in their experience of being shaped by the dominant story, that we support them in learning to empathize with themselves, and we support them in learning to empathize with others. I really believe that empathy is not something that you are born with. It's something that you do. If boys and men are socialized by the boys' toys, word cloud that says you're supposed to battle and win and conquer, then they're not being socialized to empathize with with others, or to choose empathy as something that's been feminized, that's been removed from their center of living and moving through the world. And it's as simple as, yes, you can. And we're going to support you here in doing so. In fact, we're going to need you to do it if we're going to ask you to contribute to this community in a way that helps keep it safe by practicing all kinds of bystander intervention. And so, we really just want to highlight the value of recognizing that everyone has a story, and always remembering the power that we have to negatively and positively influence people's stories. And so, speaking of stories, we're going to come back into our dominant and counter stories framework here and look a little bit more closely at unpacking. If we're asking boys and men to intervene, then we need to teach them a little bit about how sexual assault and gender-based violence at large occurs. And one of the ways that we do that is with an exercise that we call the dominant story of rape prevention, or as we'll get into, rape as a men's issue. So the way that we do this exercise is we just put the question to the group: what are things that women are taught to do on a daily basis to prevent themselves from being raped or sexually assaulted? Now, I'd really appreciate it if folks could type into the chat box. There's a lot of different answers to this question. So what are some of the first things that come to mind? Just real quick. What are some things that women are taught to do every day to prevent themselves from experiencing sexual assault of some kind? I'm saying don't go out alone. Don't go out late or alone. Be familiar with your surroundings. Conservative dress. Women are supposed to police the way that they dress, because somehow, right? Don't wear short skirts. Use the buddy system. Carry your keys in your fingers. watch your drink or don't drink. Absolutely, a whole element of incorporating alcohol into the mix. We've seen also, you know, companies have made nail polish that you can dip into a drink to tell whether or not it's been spiked by something. You know, the fact that there's a market for that is ridiculous. Carry pepper spray, or really some kind of a weapon. Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, just thank you all for your answers, right? And we know this is not a fun list to construct, and yet the answers are so readily available, you know, to us in this moment. And so, you know, in doing this exercise, we've, you know, got a list of things that generally tend to come up. And, you know, sometimes when you're working with boys and men, especially in the youth development programming side of things, who may not have ever had to think this way before, putting the list in front of them can be impactful and have the shock value of like, oh, wow, I didn't realize, you know. And so like you had said, going out in groups, there's self-defense courses. Oh, Christina, thank you. We can't hear anything now. Are others still able to hear, or are others also losing their audio? Okay, thank you.
It might
more.
be, yeah.
Hey, Christina, I'm not sure.
It might be, Christina, something with your, maybe you could hang up and try calling in again.
Hi, this is Sarah, the Stalking Resource / Campus Coordinator for the West Virginia Foundation for Rape Information and Services. I am currently out of the office, but if you leave your name and number, I will get back to you as soon as possible. Thank you.
We got Sarah's voicemail. Thank you, Sarah. So thank you all. So yeah, with this list here, you know, you all have come up with a lot of the same sorts of things. You know, paying attention to your surroundings, you know, holding your keys, look in the back of the car seat as well, you know, park in a well-lit area. I mean, the list goes on and on. It really is, you know, this is not exhaustive, but I really feel like the list is exhaustive, or exhausting, I should say. So really quick, what is it like to see this list? How does it make you feel that this is the story? This is what women are taught to do on a daily basis. You know, what's your reaction to this? Angry? Scared for my daughter? Giving other folks just another minute to type. Yeah. Aggravating, limiting. For instance, I've been told that I shouldn't go hiking in the woods because it's dangerous to be in an isolated place. If I listened to others, I would lose something that I love the most. Yeah. So this limiting, angering, you know, fear, mongering kind of, you know, reality that, and you know, I'd be curious to know, like, who are the people that are reinforcing these messages for girls and women? Who are the ones that are saying you should do this and shouldn't do that? You know, where do we get these messages from? Because they're, you know, they're in this way really positioning women to move through the world in a state of fear. And so, you know, the other thing is, are these really prevention tactics? You know, we know that a lot of them may be beneficial risk reduction strategies to some degree, and yet at the same time, they aren't fully encompassing what prevention means. And we're going to talk a little bit about what we're thinking about in terms of a holistic approach to prevention. And I see you all, yeah, some of the messages have come from men, from parents, our families. So speaking of men, let's look at what messages they receive. So I'm curious, what are men taught to do on a daily basis to prevent themselves from being raped or sexually assaulted? We just had a whole long list of things that women are taught. What are men taught? Immediately, folks say nothing. nothing, ... Can folks think of anything? Is there anything? Can't think of anything. I'm going to give folks another minute to type. And Pat, just the facilitator's note, I see that we were hoping to wrap this up by 2, and I'm working on it. We'll get there. It's like we thought.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing I can think of is maybe caution for meeting someone from online, especially if you are a gay man. So there is a population of men who are encouraged to think about their bodily safety when it comes to sexual assault. Typically gay men are maybe the recipients of that message. Or heterosexual men sometimes are taught to be wary of gay men, as though gay men are like predators. Men are just taught that if anything ever happens, to fight. So I'm glad that you shared that, Ryan, because in the dominant story of masculinity, what we're pointing to here is that there's no room for men to be a victim, for men to be survivors. The idea that men would experience sexual violence sort of contradicts how we know sexual violence occurs. And I would just add for folks, one of the things that we hear a lot when we ask what are men taught, the first thing that people say is don't drop the soap. And so there's a joke that is masking and holding for the group the really awful reality of prison rape that men experience and is part of the narrative of men's victimization in sexual violence. And still, if we go with the list that you all came up with, nothing, can't think of anything, maybe one thing or another, then that leaves us with the question of what is the role for men in prevention? What role can men play in preventing men's violence against women? And we're going to give you the answer. We would like men to be fully involved in preventing gender-based violence as a whole. And so, if the dominant story of rape prevention is that women are responsible for doing all these things and men are not that responsible for participating in prevention, then we want to frame rape and sexual assault as a men's issue. So for us, one of the ways that we do this exercise is we ask, why is rape a men's issue? How is rape connected to men's lives? And there's an importance to letting the group, especially if it's an all-male or otherwise homogenous male or group of men responding, there's an importance to struggling with the answer. Well, let me think about that. How is rape connected to men's lives? One of the first ways that we see it is that men commit rape. So for those of us who already saw this exercise on day 1, we appreciate your patience with the repeat. We know that the vast majority of men are not committing rapes or sexual assaults, and yet, at the same time, the majority of sexual assaults and rapes occur at the hands of men. So what I was talking about with men's victimization, we also know that men experience sexual violence. And in particular, I would just also add, so there's not just the, room that the dominant story of masculinity creates for men's victimization as only if you're gay, but also for the heterosexual men who are assaulted by women, where are the voices of those stories being told? Where are they being shared? There's an importance in understanding that they still exist as well. When we are in a room with folks, often what we'll do is say, show of hands, how many people know somebody who is a survivor of sexual violence of some form? And almost every hand in the room goes up. And lately what I've been also asking is how many people know perpetrators, know somebody who has perpetrated sexual violence? And often many hands go up in the room. So even if men don't know that someone is a potential survivor or somebody is a perpetrator of this harm, they may still be interacting with those people in their lives. And so therefore, it's part of your community. It's people that you know. One of our last points here is that men are confined by rape as well. And in this point, we really want to hone into and tap into, the middle audience that we're trying to reach. If we know that, there's on one end of the continuum, all the people who are trying to better themselves every day and remove rape culture from the world and are, holding themselves accountable on a regular basis. And on the other end of the continuum, we have the people who are perpetrating the harm and who are making the world a harder place. There's the middle of, the average Joes who we want to move into aware Joes, who may not be thinking of sexual assault as a problem that they need to pay attention to, as connected to their lives. And our job here is to point out how it is indeed connected. And so I would just like to go back to, I'm sorry that I'm doing this, folks, go back to this list here of the things that women are taught to do. So if women are taught to do these things and it creates a state of fear that women are living in, then who is it that they're afraid of? Who is the boogeyman that is being, cast as the bad guy here? In this case, it's men. And just like we talk about the dominant story of masculinity creating a confining effect on men and limiting men's and boys' experience of, what it means to be a human being, then we're also in this way looking at how men are shaped and socialized as well by the shared understanding or shared knowledge that they may be seen as a perpetrator, as a threat, before they come across as a human being. And, I'd be interested to know if you asked the men who you work with or the boys who you work with this question, and got them to think about it a little bit, how they might be able to come up with stories of ways that they say, oh, yeah, I do see how this shows up in my life. Here's an example. One of the last ways that we say that rape is a men's issue is that we believe men can stop rape. I mean, the name of the organization, really lives on. It's direct and it's in your face, and we believe it. Men can be a part of this movement and can be a successful part of this movement, and have learned a lot from the last 100 years of the women's movement. So now, with healthy masculinity as a resource to turn to, we want to really position boys and men with the belief that they can do something, they can be involved, they can be helpful. And so one of the ways that they can be helpful is, as we're about to talk about, with bystander intervention. And so for us, we really want to focus on how primary prevention is a tool, is a lens, is an approach to take in preventing gender-based violence as a whole, and how bystander intervention fits into that. So for us, we focus on primary prevention by saying, look, this public health approach is about stopping gender-based violence before it starts. And so that means replacing the harmful attitudes, assumptions, and behaviors connected to a less than perspective that is part of healthy masculinity with
unhealthy.
I'm sorry, that is part of unhealthy masculinity. Thank you, Pat. With healthy masculinity, pro-social norms. And that less than perspective, I don't know if we said this earlier or not, Pat, but that less than dynamic, that less than perspective is present in the dominant story in the way, that's what the problem is. If some things are healthy in the dominant story and some things are unhealthy, it's when there's no room for alternative that creates the less than perspective, that there's a better way to be and there's a worse way to be. In the one up and one down world, as Terry Real, a therapist that we worked with, talks about, there are winners and losers in the world of patriarchy. And so we're saying with healthy masculinity, like someone had said earlier, there's the opportunity for power with. So I'm going to get off my soapbox. Pat, I'm going to pass it over to you. Is there anything you want to add?
I think we're going to move forward just so we can stay on track. And I believe that It's On Us video is next. So we're gonna start digging into the bystander intervention piece now, and it'll build on everything we've been talking about. Certainly the why rape is a men's issue is a motivating factor if they understand. I think a lot of times men and boys are stuck in as just a women's issue and don't see it as applying to them. So, if you can break that assumption, that dominant story, that idea, and it's still present out there, it may not have quite as much power because I think bystander intervention is being taught more, but, it's still pervasive. It still is not gone yet. And so helping them understand why they're affected by it, and then understand there are things they can do. It's not just about women, but it's really about everybody. And so, but that doesn't mean that you don't have to well, it can be helpful to approach bystander intervention through that dominant story and counter story lens in terms of masculinity that we've been talking about. And so now we're going to kind of get into that, as well as the social and emotional intelligence that Jeremy has been bringing up. So if you could show the video real quickly.
Is that?
I believe it's short.
I think
did we take out
after,
the video?
I don't think we took it out.
I guess it's wrong in the agenda.
We may have.
Okay. We may the agenda may be a little wrong here. So let me just start out by then. Let's dig in here and just ask. Some of you probably teach bystander intervention. Some of you might not. It's perfectly fine. But those of you who do you have a description that you use, or how is it that you characterize bystander intervention, just in general or in relation to sexual assault? Doesn't either way. So, men are just talking if anything ever. Oh, sorry, that's not new. That's old. So, can somebody type in how they think about bystander intervention, or if they are teaching it, how they describe it to the people they're teaching or working with? I see a few people typing, so we'll just wait and see what they have to say. I think it's important to make sure we're all on the same page in terms of how we understand bystander intervention. It certainly is something that's gets a lot of attention now, and it is a useful tool, a useful strategy. So it sounds like Stacy talks about it in general, but most examples are for sexual-based violence. Being able to recognize the signs of sexual violence and interfering with the process to stop it. Yeah. And let's see. The idea that we could possibly prevent violence if we know what to look for. Mm-hmm. And so, I think that's all of that. Thank you. That's all really helpful. And I think it is, in terms of that awareness piece that we were talking about earlier, it is being aware of. It's like, and then figuring out what can I do? And I think that's a complicated question. What can I do? And especially for men, I think boys is our perspective, because they haven't even thought about intervening, much less kind of what am I uncomfortable with, and when should I intervene? So it's all kind of new to them, is what we're suggesting. But and I think your description fits pretty well, or your points fit well with ours, and that if you want to bring up let's see. So, but you can think of the circumstances that involve. There have to be at least three. Well, there don't always have to be three people. There have to be, I would say, at least two people, because sometimes there's not a potential perpetrator. Depending on, we also talk about intervening when there are behaviors or attitudes expressed that are connected with what Jeremy was talking about earlier in terms of that less than perspective, and being attuned to that as well. Those are moments to intervene too, and those are even earlier moments to intervene. So the more you can teach that, I think the better, because that kind of creates a different kind of environment before anything happens. But so there have to be at least two people, somebody who's I wouldn't say necessarily a potential perpetrator, but somebody who's expressing attitudes and assumptions and behaviors that we would connect with that less than perspective. And a bystander, or this circumstance, as we're suggesting here, a potential survivor, potential perpetrator, and bystander, and that's a circumstance in which the possibility of sexual assault is much more present, and so I think it's important to distinguish between those two kinds of circumstances. But bystander intervention, doing or saying something to challenge harmful behaviors and attitudes present in situations that might contribute to to sexual violence. And I think your descriptions are definitely in line with that. And so now let's see if the video is up next.
There we go.
All right. So we're going to watch, this may be a video you've probably seen. It's, if you know the campaign It's On Us, it's connected with that, which came out of the White House administration when Obama and Biden were in office. And we were connected with that. Neil Irvin, our executive director, was on the committee that helped develop It's On Us, and this is one of the videos that came out of that.
Okay.
Let's see if it plays.
About being a guy. Stop. Learn how and take the pledge. It's on us. Stop.
So you might not have been able to understand but I think you get the general idea. I don't think you needed the words in particular to understand the video and what's going on. But I think, it brings up for us, I want to explore, well, actually, Jeremy, I think this is your part. But so let me make some points in terms of that video. I love the video. I love the guy, seeing that this is not okay with him, and he gets up off the sofa, but we don't know what he's going to do to intervene. And so, if you think about that through that dominant story lens in terms of masculinity, where do you end up? So, Jeremy?
Yeah. So, thank you, Pat, because really the video does offer a great opportunity to explore, like, what are the options for intervening, especially if that's the environment, that's the scenario, right? We know that sexual assault exists in other places than the party scene with, the alcohol and the blasting music. But even still in that scenario and in others, how does the dominant story of masculinity socialize men to intervene? And so I'm wanting to pull on your all's expertise here. I mean, I would say you all, without even if you haven't done the real man exercise or, heard us talk about the real man in the way that we historically do, you've heard us talk about dominant stories. So, what are some situations in which a real man, intervenes, or how does he intervene? What are his motivations for intervening? And I think I was foreshadowing a little bit when we talked about the boys and girls toys word clouds, that those may offer, some insight into where we're going with this here. So can folks type into the chat box or unmute yourself? How do you think that this dominant story of masculinity that we're talking about positions men to think about bystander intervention?
What is the dominant story of how men intervene?
What would you expect that young man in the video to do in a very dominant story kind of way? We'll give folks a moment to type. It's interesting, Pat. I think about the participant experience on these virtual kind of webinars, and it's so like you can just share your ideas in person and kind of put them into words and let it happen on the fly. But to type it in, you're like, oh, there's too many words. What do I do?
Yeah.
It could play off of the action theme. Yeah. So stepping into that action-oriented, confrontational kind of behavior. Thank you, Stacy.
And what would he do based on that action theme? I mean, what kind of intervention? What would that intervention look like? Distract and Donnell, distract is something we're going to get to a little bit later on, so thanks for that. I don't know that fits in with that dominant story, but it's definitely important, and so hold on to that because it's something that is very useful.
So yeah, thank you, Stacy. Fight or harsh words. I'm thinking of dominance. Christina, he would display a more dominant appearance than those who are going for her. If I see something, I do something about it. Yes, Donald, absolutely. If you see something, say something is the New York subway line. But if you see something, doing something, stepping into action is part of that dominant story of masculinity, right? Let's see, Ryan. So I did this in a bar once, and when I tried to intervene by talking to the girl like I was an old friend to try to pull her away from the situation, it turned into a fight real quick. So maybe if you plan to do this, try to have a backup, or if you can, or a better plan than that, right? And I'm glad that you shared that, Ryan, because, one, I want to honor the courage to do something. We've seen the tactic of, pretending to be a friend and, try to give the girl an out. And I think even taking on that persona, performing that kind of an intervention does require some courage to, I don't remember how many of us, I don't know how many of us took drama classes in school, but to all of a sudden pretend to be somebody's friend who, it's a very complicated, there are a lot of moving parts. Even that takes some real courage. And this dominant story of masculinity that we're talking about showed up there as the final result where a fight broke out. So,
and I think it brings up the point that the dominant story is always kind of looming there. Even if you're not caught up in it, that doesn't necessarily mean it's not present. There's all those ways in which it has an impact on the circumstances, and you have to take it into account. Your safety is important.
And so, thank you, Pat. And I'm thinking back to, for those of us who were with us for the Real Man exercise, one of the things that we pointed out was kind of how that dominant story of masculinity, a real man, is really only interested in his appearance, whereas the strongest man was more interested in others and relationships. And so to this last question here, what are the real man's motivations for intervening? Maybe more self-centered in wanting to either look good or look more masculine in front of others, and that this would somehow maybe yield the final result of getting the girl, that there's a motivation to intervene that's reward-driven, that's based on what I get out of it. And those dominant stories are, I think, present sometimes when we're talking about bystander intervention for men, and maybe barriers that they're up against when thinking about intervening, when wondering, is this the moment? How do I even do it? And so we want to use some of that place from which, men can grow and learn as a way of looking into what are the other options for us here.
Just to make the point quickly, that really, in terms of the dominant story, it significantly limits men's strategies for intervening, I think. Yeah. And as all of you are pointing out, and it's really connected with that kind of that action figure and elements of that, so that, that's the way we usually think of it, right? Or we don't intervene.
Yeah. It's not how would G.I. Joe intervene. What we want to know is how would you intervene? So thank you, Pat. And we're wanting to, allow this to be a place to, sort of break down the different ways to intervene. Just some other research, and ways of talking about this to support this dominant story idea of intervention. Compared to college-age men, college-age women have more positive bystander attitudes and behaviors in relation to sexual assault. Men are less likely to intervene due to the social norms of hegemonic masculinity characterized by heterosexuality, strength, and sexual prowess. I imagine a lot of us are really familiar with this. the hegemony, which is there's a centerpiece of masculinity that others are shaped around. You know, there's one version, a dominant story of masculinity that is the way to be, and all the others are less than, right? These are messages, these are social norms, gender scripts that are being worked through in the role play and thinking of bystander intervention here that we're wanting to point out. That's there, and that may be in your way. So then what can we do to get it out of your way? So can I ask, let's see, do folks know how to use the raise your hand function on their Adobe Connect? I've only seen it used a couple of times, to be honest. So I just want to make sure that we can do this. Okay, we've got the raised hand. Okay, everybody does. Okay, thank you. So what we'd like you to do is raise your hand if you have seen or intervened in some way with a family member. Have you ever intervened in some way, even if it's not connected to sexual assault, but just an intervention of some kind, intervened with a family member? Mm-hmm. Several hands raised so far. And now I'm wondering, do we have to click OK on all these for you to be able to raise your hand again? It's so much different. Like, we can't just
I know, I'm not used to Adobe Connect. Yeah.
You know what? I'm going to do, Pat? We're going to change gears here. Can folks just type yes or no? So we don't have to clear anything. Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, West Virginia team, for helping us with this. I don't know if folks can lower their own hands, but what we're going to do is you're just going to type yes in the chat box. So have you intervened with a family member? Yes. Have you intervened with a friend? How about a stranger? Have you ever intervened in some way with a stranger? And how about a colleague? Have you ever intervened in some way with a colleague, somebody that you work with? No. Yes. Do we have one more, Pat? I think that may be it.
No, I think that's it.
So what I want to lift up and would encourage you all, I don't know if any of you do this already in your bystander intervention trainings, or if there's an opportunity to do so, in the future. Pat, you were telling the story of my first ever trip with you to do some trainings, and I remember it. We were in Texas, and I asked this question, and again, in a group of high school boys, all raised their hands in response to some of these similar prompts. Maybe not colleague, but teammate instead.
Right.
And so what we want to lift up is that, people have experience with bystander intervention and understand that there are different ways of intervening that allows you to say, yes, I have intervened with somebody in some way in this regard. Or no, actually I have not, and, I wonder what that would look like. And we want to lift up this experience as something to tap into, a memory that your body already has, that maybe even your mind does too, that we can tap into as a resource here. And so with that, Oh, sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead, Pat.
Well, I was just going to make the point that they know more than they think they do often, and so it's just helping them recognize, oh, this is something you do in your everyday life, and that you may not do it in relation to sexual assault and those attitudes and behaviors that we were talking about, but you do this. And so it helps them recognize that. And so, it's just a way we've talked about helping them transfer what they do over here to over here. And so that simple exercise just helps them kind of make that kind of transition and recognize it. Like, oh, I'm not removed from this. It's something I do. So now I just have to figure out how to do it over here. So the gut is, sorry.
I was just saying, back to rape as a men's issue. Did you want to take this, Pat? Yep. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, you're going to do your story, but I will start out with my story. The gut is emotionally intelligent. There's a lot of ways we think of the gut. When I was in high school, I played basketball and was at Christ the King High School in Lubbock, Texas, and we played a team in McAdoo, Texas, and lost by 40 points. And the coach was not happy about it, and so we had what was a gut check on the Saturday following the game, and basically it was a test. Are you kind of man enough, essentially, to be on this team? And I wasn't sure I was. So I couldn't even pull my jersey off after the practice because it was intense and there was a lot of running and it was just so sweaty I couldn't even get it off. But so that's one way we think of what a gut check might be, but it's not the only other way. There are other ideas behind paying attention to your gut. So can I ask if people might type or in the chat box what's another idea of gut check or paying attention to your gut in terms of what it might mean differently than that? And we'll give people a minute to do that. Intuition, yep. Thank you, Christina. An inner sense, yes. Donnell. In a sense that your gut telling you, communicating something about what feels right or doesn't feel right, feeling uneasy, something isn't right, yep, like I was just saying. So, there's also that sense in which we can think of gut check. I'm doing a gut check, and it's like, how do I actually feel about this? And if you want to move to the next slide, Jerry. So it turns out that the gut, which you see a picture of the brain and the gut right there, and they look remarkably similar, which probably has no meaning at all, but I want to present the idea to you that your gut, as you're suggesting in your comments, has a certain kind of intelligence, and actually scientists call your gut the second brain, which I find fascinating. And the reason they do that is because your gut actually, when the fetus is forming, the gut and the brain are actually all initially one lump, and then they separate. And they're still connected by the spinal cord and different parts. But the interesting thing is that the gut has more neurotransmitters than all the other parts of the body combined, except for the brain. And that's why they call it the second brain. And so its intelligence is not logic or reason or anything like that. But I think that suggests that it's kind of its intelligence is an early warning system, kind of a red flag. It's like something doesn't feel right here, and that's why I think we frame it in terms of doing a gut check, or what's your gut telling you, all those sorts of things. And so when we do this exercise, part of our goal is to help young men get in touch with what their gut is telling them, because they've been taught to ignore it in so many ways. And so to validate what it might be telling them and help them, connect with what it might be telling them is an important task. And so we usually present this and then, share a story in which we can simply ask that question. So Jeremy is just going to share a story that is based on his experience.
Well, one of the things, you know, as I've mentioned a few times now, I was a varsity athlete in college, and you know, I just first want to preface by saying, you know, the story. There are a lot of athletes who've responded to the locker room talk, you know, a conversation that has, you know, happened in our country, and have said, well, that our locker room is not like that. And I think that is true in my experience for the most part as well. And yet I'm about to tell a locker room talk story. And so in that example, we got out of practice, and, you know, the guys are in various states of undress, and we're you know, talking as we sort of normally do. And I think at that particular moment, the guys were talking about sex. And one of the guys did actually say and recount, announcing kind of to everyone else, like, yes, no means yes, and yes means anal. That horrible saying that we've seen pop up on, you know, the worst of what unhealthy masculinity has to offer. He actually said that to the room. So, Pat, do I pause the story here, or do I?
Yeah, why don't you pause there?
Okay.
And so, you know, usually we would tell a story without an intervention present, and it's like, okay, hearing that, what's your gut telling you? And it's as simple as that. And, you know, guys will respond in lots of different ways. They'll say, you know, that's not right, or it's like, you know, okay, said that. Don't necessarily, they won't kind of connect it with their feelings, but they will kind of, I think, express their uncomfort or discomfort in some way or other. And that's what you're looking for, is like them to kind of communicate. I'm not down with that. I'm not good with that. And so if you hear Jeremy tell kind of the now kind of build out the story a little bit more.
So what was interesting about this moment was that we all, you know, we're a team. We know each other's personalities, and we kind of know what's going on. Ooh, careful. I think there's somebody who may not be on mute that I'm going to ask to go on mute really quick. So in this particular example, we know this guy who's saying it, and we knew that he was saying it to get a rise out of all of us. We also knew that he knew that it was wrong, and still him being provocative in that moment was an attempt at performing that kind of dominant story of masculinity. And it was interesting because I remember I was connected to this work in my college experience at this time. So I was very much wondering, what is the intervention here? And you could see across the locker room, everybody kind of stop and turn and just give him a look. And there was a real consensus, unspoken, but felt in that moment, yeah, that's not true. None of us believe that, except for you. And so, you know, a couple of guys were wrestling with, like, I don't know exactly what to say here, but, you know, because I don't really want to confront or challenge you, or I don't want to seem like an activist. There's the I don't want, you know, that's happening. And yet, a few of them still try to formulate some response that says, just in case nobody's going to say it, I'm going to say it. That's not cool, and that's not okay. And I remember one guy in particular who was really kind of mustering up the courage to say something. And, you know, he had been in the bystander intervention training that I ran with my soccer team. And he had remembered, you know, the skills that we talked about. And I could see him working through his mind, like, this is the moment to say the thing that I'm supposed to say. And he worked up the courage to say something. And ultimately, you know, his intervention was laughed off. But I also walked away from it feeling like the intervention was the initial gut response that the entire team had, which was not. That's not okay. There's a real sense of what you just inserted into this space contradicts our social norms, our team values. And I thought that was powerful enough that we're not going to change this guy in this one moment. This one intervention isn't going to be, you know, the thing that steers him away. I mean, it was clear that he said what he said to get a rise out of us, to get us to react. And so the intervention in that space is almost to not react. And yet Do we want to just say nothing? Because if we don't say anything, then are we condoning it? And so it just, really presents the contradiction that often comes up with bystander intervention as it intersects with our gender scripts and the social and group dynamic of being with other people.
And just how complex that the circumstances are. But I do think if you can validate, for instance, if you were doing this exercise with your team, I think it would validate those kind of feelings that they were experiencing at the moment when he said that. And again, that's part of the step is to help young men get in touch with kind of that discomfort and validate it. So in terms of how they intervene, then that's the struggle, right? That's the hard part. Especially, I think we talk about it a lot of times. It gets talked about in terms of the 3 Ds: distract, delegate, direct, and those are great. You mentioned distract earlier, but it's often kind of very complex. I think the 3 Ds are nice because they're easy to remember, but as we pointed out earlier, there are probably already intervention strategies that the young men have used earlier in different circumstances, but they're not thinking about them and they're not thinking about those necessarily strategies. And so one of the things we like to do if we have the time is once we get them kind of in touch with, once we get them to see this as their issue, and we've built out the dominant story and counter story and, get them in touch with that kind of emotional feeling and discomfort, and that, they need to act and want to act, then, we explore with them, how do you act? What are the ways you can do it other than that dominant story way that we explored earlier, which, is too limiting. You need other intervention strategies and ones that hopefully don't escalate the situation, as was shared earlier. And that's why it's so tricky. So one of the ways we do that is just break them up into groups and present them with scenarios. And what we're going to do today is we're not going to break you up into groups, but we're just going to present you with a scenario and see what kind of interventions you might come up with. And as I mentioned, you don't want to escalate the situation. So we're going to look at those scenarios. I just want you to type in intervention strategies that you think might make sense for the circumstances and situations. And we have there that practice social and emotional intelligence, because some strategies are more suitable than others for circumstances, and given what the emotional situation is, what the social situation is. So how do we take those into account? And don't expect you to talk about those. Probably Jeremy and I will talk about that, unless you want to unmute yourself and talk about it. But if you just type in the intervention, and we'll talk about how that might connect with the social and emotional issues that might be present, and why that intervention might make sense given that circumstance. So let's go on to the first one. So you come back to your dorm room, find your friends there, and they're talking about how many girls they've been with, and ask you what your body count is. So you've got a group of people there. How do you intervene? Who does the intervention, and what intervention strategy is it? What do you think? Any ideas out there? We'll give people a little bit of time to respond. I love doing this exercise just because by the time you get to the end of it, and I don't know that it'll work this way online. I hope it will, but usually we end up with a good 10, 11, 12 strategies that they've come up with, and I think that that's really valuable and important. So just say none of your business. Yeah. So your idea would be that the person who is being asked the question would respond by saying none of your business. So, and I think in terms of the circumstances, I think that is kind of emotionally and socially intelligent in the sense that really it's the person kind of who's being asked the question who, in some sense, the control is being thrown to them, and they decide how they're going to take it, how they're going to sort of respond in a way that is both kind of reflects their kind of where they are emotionally with it, and then that in terms of the social circumstances, I think it just sort of shuts it down and doesn't really open the door any further. Be direct and tell them it's not okay to be talking about women like that. Yeah, and I would say I think that that is a good strategy, and especially if you can personalize it. Because if you could say, look, I'm not okay talking about women like that, and make it about you and not about them, because we know that when you speak either generally or you say, man, you shouldn't talk about women like that, that it's people are more likely to get defensive. So the circumstance I think is people kind of respect if you're speaking from your own perspective, and then if you could just give a kind of a request after that too. It's like, so I'd appreciate if you didn't talk that way around me, and hopefully they'll get the message that it's not just about you, but it's really about other people as well, about women in those circumstances as well. So take a second to, yeah, sure.
Well, can I add, Pat? Also, sorry, I think I got dropped off the call, but I'm back. So, one of the things that I like about Donald's intervention with none of your business, and all these questions and say, well, don't you have anything else that what are you asking me right now? Being direct and telling them it's not okay. I like that each of these has a sort of boundary setting element of it. That's kind of like either if you're going to do this, I'm not going to participate. That's sending a message about the expectations and social norms that you as an individual want to be a part of and don't want to be a part of. For the none of your business that says like what you're talking about is private, and so that's private information that is not necessarily to be shared willy-nilly, and in this way that may be debaucherous, amongst people who have not developed that sort of like lane of trust, and then the body count aspect of like quantifying and making it into a competition of some kind. Again, we're pushing back on all those. And I like, what Pat is saying, like, if the hope is that they get the message kind of thing, it's important that, we know that when we intervene and say none of your business, that may be just one intervention along the continuum of semesters, an entire semester of interventions that ultimately shapes the other person, helps them shape the social norms that they're participating in, helping them question, why do I feel the need to talk about this? Why do I feel like I want to? Am I searching for some kind of in-group inclusion that performing this kind of masculinity, this kind of friendship, fulfills that maybe I'm not that interested in, maybe I'm not that bought into?
Let me jump in as well, Jeremy, and say that I just want to, in terms of Stacy's, and that's a lame question. I think I think that you point out an important point, and again, this is in terms of social and emotional intelligence, and recognizing that this is a group of your friends, right? Which is a different circumstance than I think the one that was pointed out earlier, where you're going to react differently if you know the people. That's a different social circumstance. So you can say something like, "I think that's a lame question," because your friends are going to take that in a certain way, that's different than somebody you don't know. And I certainly in Where Do You Stand, the campaign that we put together, and that is going to be shared with many of you. And it, was based on focus groups that we did with college-age men. Their interventions were like in circumstances that involve their friends, were often like, that's a lame question. So, that's something that makes a lot of sense in those circumstances. So I think we got, 3 or 4 kind of...
Yeah, we may not get to all of them. But
yeah, we
may
may not get to all of them. Yeah, why don't we go on to the next one?
Okay. So a man in a...
Yeah.
Oh,
You go ahead.
Sure. A man in a student group you are a member of, team, fraternity, class, whatever, uses the word bitch when describing others. When some members of the group confront him, he brushes off their concerns and continues to use the word.
Any strategies that you think might make sense?
Yeah. What are some strategies that you all can think of that, like you already have done, practice some of the emotional and social intelligence that we're wanting to encourage as being part of bystander intervention?
And obviously, this is a different circumstance than the previous one in the sense that the members of the group are not tight friends in the same kind of way, probably. Jeremy, you want to read them? It's probably easier for you.
Sure. We got so far, I would say that it's inappropriate and tell him not to use it. Mm-hmm.
And that, that might make sense in terms of, we don't exactly know what, the function of the student group is. So, how official it is, and whether it's a formal, informal. I think the more formal the student group would be, the more, the inappropriate kind of comment would especially work.
And I like
you could even say, yeah, you might even say something about how that's not, how our student group likes to speak and represent itself. I know I'm just thinking in terms of Men of Strength Club. One of the things we'll sometimes say is that's not how Men of Strength acts.
Yeah, and I know, like, the intervention of, being a part of a soccer team, I could easily say to any of my teammates, I know you wouldn't say that in front of coach. And that sort of becomes a barometer of, like, moral standing, moral shaping. We see some others, social shunning, stop engaging since the first intervention didn't work, maybe work the way up the social hierarchy to make it stop. And I like the aspect of, like, a group intervention in that way, that there's a real power to, we all can act. We all have power and can take it back. In this, we're not necessarily attacking the character of this person, but we can, with our decision-making, with where and how we spend our time, send a message about what we believe in, what we value. And Donald had followed up, at least the person would know where you stand. Back to the question, where do you stand? Wouldn't that be great? The intervention is, you remember that poster we saw over at on the bulletin board, in the What You Call It Center? It said, where do you stand? Oh, I'm going to tell you where I stand right now. And we've got another, I'd give him the definition of the B word and ask him why he's comparing people to female dogs. And part of where, again, asking questions that I like is being able to continue to invite the person into, like, I'm not just going to, completely shut you down necessarily, but I am going to ask you to explain yourself.
And that questioning can be a really useful strategy, I think, because they don't expect that. I mean, especially, when guys a lot of times are acting in these ways, I mean, they expect people to go along with it, right? Or in the case that Jeremy gave earlier, they're just trying to get a rise out of people. And so, how do you kind of intervene in those circumstances. I like I mean, another way to do the group intervention, I don't know that this would necessarily work here, but one of the ways I like to talk about intervening as a group is just turning to other people and say, is anybody else not okay with that? Or am I the only one? Because sometimes it's just to pull in other people as well. If they know one person is not okay with it, then it gives them other people permission to say, no, I'm not cool with that either.
Back to the Solomon Asch study of visible allies.
Yep.
One person says, if one person presents as an ally, then it allows other people to do the same.
Exactly.
So Pat, we're at 2:58 here.
Yeah, we're at 3. So you know, there's. Why don't we go through the? We're not going to ask you for interventions for the next 2, but why don't you bring them up and let's just move it forward. And thank you for all your interventions. All useful. And you can see different interventions work in different for the same circumstances, actually. Hanging out with a close male friend, he begins to tell you about an intimate encounter he had where he wasn't sure that he consented. And then another, what's the 4th one? Let's go to that. You got a house party off campus and had a few drinks. You see a female friend who's visibly drunk, being led to a rideshare car by a guy you don't know. And these are all, you know, circumstances that we've heard from college students. But if you're thinking about doing this and working on your campus or in your community, I would talk to young people. I'd get some young people together and say, look, what are circumstances that come up? So because you really want the circumstances to resonate with them. And you might even find ways to connect them to the community. Either they take place in a particular place on campus or in the community, and just make them real. The more real you can make them, and the more they resonate, I think the more they're going to connect with those circumstances and be invested in and interested in thinking about how they can handle the situation. So I think that that's important. So as I pointed out earlier, when we go through and do this exercise, we usually will come up with 10 to 12 interventions, and the guys usually have come up with, and you know, they'll say, oh, you know, usually we divide them up into groups first, and have them come up with a couple interventions, and then, you know, because it's important they do this as a social act if you can make it at all that way, because in so many ways they're taught to kind of distrust other men and not to think about, oh, they don't see this as an issue, and intervening, they're not going to do that. So to give them some practice with other men to come up with interventions, to recognize this is a moment to intervene, is really beginning to change that social norm, and to give them a little bit of muscle memory around really, how do I do this? As Jeremy was pointing out in his example, it's like, oh, here it is for real. You know, what do I do? The more they can get in terms of practice that way, and the more kind of understanding they can have, oh, there's lots of different ways I can intervene, all to the better. And the more they'll own it as well if they've come up with it, rather than you just saying, here's 3 ways you can intervene. And again, I'm not saying that that's not useful, but if you have the opportunity to help them kind of own the whole idea of intervening, it's really valuable and can break down some of the things that we've been talking about in terms of masculine socialization, and help them understand all the forces that make it difficult for them to intervene, all to the better as well. And so our final question, I believe, is man of strength and healthy masculine bystander intervention. We talked earlier about strongest man, what situation, and by strength we are talking about strength of characters, just to be clear. What situations does a strong man intervene in? How does a strong man intervene? Why does a strong man intervene? And these are the opposite questions, but complementary in terms of the dominant story questions, the real man questions. and I'm just going to answer them to end. In what situations does a strong man intervene? He intervenes in lots of different situations. It's not just about his own kind of image, or it's not just about whether, you know, the woman he's connected to or the young woman he's connected to is, you know, somebody's hitting on her. It's not that. He intervenes and anytime there's kind of somebody who's being talked about as less than, as we were discussing earlier. He recognized that it's not, you know, just when a sexual assault is possibly about to happen, yes, then, but even before that point. And how does he intervene? He has multiple strategies for intervening, not just fighting or, you know, that action figure kind of way of intervening, but all sorts of strategies that are less likely to escalate the situation. And then why does the strong man intervene? You know, for multiple reasons. I would say he intervenes because he cares about other people, for all the things that we associated with what it means to be the strongest man. And, you know, if you think about all this that KD example, you know, it's about caring about others, which we all need to do, and certainly it will be a better world if we do that, and certainly there'll be less violence and less sexual assault. And this is one way of caring about people and for people. So, so that is the end of the content for our session today. And Jeremy, we're about 5 minutes after time, but if anybody wants to stick around and has any questions or comments, or I'll certainly be happy to answer those.
Yeah, likewise.
I think a couple of us got booted on and off. So, Sarah, are you on the phone line?
I am.
Okay, great.
Yeah,
go ahead if you want to wrap it. I just wanted to check and make sure you were on there.
Yeah. Thank everybody again. I do want to say to Pat and Jeremy, thank you guys. I really appreciated the stories you told and the scenarios you used, because that really aligns with the feedback we got for our campus grant. We work with 9 campuses under our campus grant, and one of the things we did under that grant was we did climate surveys. And the climate surveys did include questions about bystander intervention, and it's always really great to get that feedback. And so what we heard from students is that they were way more likely to intervene in those situations that they thought might lead to harm, so such as something that they perceived as, you know, possibly becoming physical, or somebody that was really intoxicated, and that they were less likely to intervene in those situations that were verbal, so the jokes and the comments, like the examples you gave. And they really asked for more practice around interrupting verbal stuff and for more tools. And so one of the ways we've been using our Intercollegiate Council Against Sexual Violence listserv is to provide them with resources and tools to get better at that. So I really appreciated your stories and those examples. And again, I want to thank you for spending 3 days with us now. I want to thank everybody that's on today for spending 3 days with us. The survey link should be in the chat box. I'll also send it out. And thank you guys so much.
Well, thank you, Sarah, and it has been a real pleasure to spend the 3 days with you. And I think as we all kind of transition to this online world, this has been a great experience for us. I think we've obviously been doing online work for a while, but I think it's been rare for us to do a series of sessions for 3 days in a row, and it's actually been much more pleasurable and fun and interesting and engaging than I expected. And I think it's because of all of you who've been here and have been willing to stick with us and use that chat box, and even sometimes unmute yourselves, and we managed to make it interactive, and couldn't have done that without you. And so thank you so much for all that your work too, and the work you're going to do from here on out as well.
Yeah, I would just echo that, Pat. Just thank you all for your contributions and for showing up. And I really do appreciate. I know, it's different when you're presenting. You're sort of responsible for it all. But when you're just a participant and you're sort of trying to find your contribution in it, it can be a challenge to sit in front of the computer screen for 2 hours every day. And I just appreciate you all for putting up with that. and engaging, as much as you did. It really did make the difference. And I know that Pat and I have learned from this experience and learned from you all as well. So, just looking forward to the future and continuing this relationship.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Bye, Sarah.
Bye.
Bye-bye.